Wow, it's like one of those Jacques Cousteau films where the sharks are in a feeding frenzy. Except this time, it's a bunch of bankers. Stacey?
Yes, Max, there's allegedly a feeding frenzy that could happen on Wall Street. Feeding frenzy seen if Wall Street sues itself over LIBOR. Yes, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley are among financial firms that may bring lawsuits against their biggest rivals as regulators on 3 continents examine whether other banks manipulated the London interbank offered rate known as LIBOR, said Bradley Hintz, an analyst with Sanford C. Bernstein and Company. Now, the only reason why they would do this, according to Hintz, is that Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley manage money market funds. So they, by law, would be obliged to. He, however, says that they wouldn't want to have to do this because they want cordial relationships with the other banks.
Oh, yeah. Well, as if the law ever stopped these guys from doing whatever it is they want to do. But now they're hiding behind the skirt of the law suddenly when it suits them. Just like, remember, back during the crisis, Goldman Sachs, they were not a bank. They wanted to get all the benefits of not being a bank. And then when the crisis hit, they decided, oh, no, we are a bank. And, you know, they treat the law as a plastic, movable feast, you know, as whatever. They write the laws themselves. What am I talking about? If they don't like what's going on, they write new laws. And frickin' Obama just rubber stamps it.
Now, Max, in fact, a former Goldman Sachs partner who is now a finance professor at New York University's Stern School of Business says that plaintiffs would face difficulties such as proving how much money they lost. So if you can't prove how much money we stole from you, you can't sue us, right? Then he says it makes it even more complicated when the regulators appear to have known about it and not have objected to it, which means it wasn't illegal. All I can say is good luck with your lawsuit.
Right, Roy Smith over there at the Stern School of Business of NYU, where I went to school, by the way. You know, fighting the good fight for lawlessness, teaching the next generation of crooks to go down there on Wall Street and steal. So according to Roy, as long if laws are on the books, if the regulators don't enforce them, it means that they're to be ignored.
Well, Max, I think we already sorted this at the Nuremberg trials. If your Führer tells you to murder and commit genocide, it is still against the law, no matter who is telling you to do an immoral, illegal act. It's on the books, it's illegal. Now, we've seen in the U.S. that they retroactively pass laws to provide immunity for, like the telecom companies breaking your Fourth Amendment rights in the Constitution. We also know that there's some sort of czar that George Bush appointed in 2003 or 2005 who gets to override any sort of investigation on national security grounds.
Exactly right. It's bankers write the laws, they break the laws, they write new laws, and Roy Smith at NYU teaching the next generation to be completely disregard all laws.
Well, let's look at some of the people that are suing for LIBOR, because there were many people who were lost out on this. Now, CalPERS. Others may sue big banks on LIBOR rate fixing. The California Public Employees Retirement System, otherwise known as CalPERS, the largest public pension in the country, is considering legal action against banks that fraudulently fixed the LIBOR rate. The CalPERS chief investment officer, Joseph Deere, said, quote, once again, the financial services industry demonstrated that it cannot be trusted to make decisions in the long-term interests of investors. So Max, here you have CalPERS. He's saying, once again, we have been defrauded. Our clients, the pension fund holders, have been defrauded. Just like in the first article here, we're talking about Goldman Sachs might be forced to sue on behalf of their clients. Here, CalPERS, who is constantly eaten by that shark frenzy on Wall Street, nibbled, and they each take their dime and their nickel here and their dollar there from the pension funds that CalPERS. Has CalPERS ever done anything before to protect their clients?
No, CalPERS, as a matter of fact, they're supposed to have some kind of socially responsible investing policy, and yet they buy into CDO, collateralized debt obligations for Bear Stearns, hundreds of millions of dollars worth. We pointed that out to them many years ago, and they told us, no, these are good assets, even though they were clearly worthless. The pension fund is now underfunded by something like 50%. So these pensioners are going to starve to death, and this is part of the victim pool that results from scandals like LIBOR, because when you artificially suppress interest rates down to zero, the pension account of CalPERS can't meet its funding requirement, and over 5 or 10 years, it blows up, there's nothing left, and then the people die. And then Barclays will say, well, we didn't put the gun to their head. You know, well, yeah, you did, Barclays, Bob Diamond. You did put the gun to those people's heads. Their lives, their deaths are on your head. Yeah, you did kill them. You are a mass murderer, Bob Diamond, duh.
Here's another headline relating to CalPERS. California's pension plan, CalPERS, made a paltry 1% in past year. So it's 50% underfunded. Their actuarial assumptions are for 7.5% annual return. Now, California is not alone in facing the fatal alternatives, angry taxpayers versus angry pensioners. The Center for Retirement Research, CPR, just assessed some 126 pension funds and found the majority of them in the same boat, underfunded by at least 25% and probably closer to 50%. Those plans have assets of $2.6 trillion, but they should have in excess of $6 trillion to meet their promises to their beneficiaries.
Right, that 1% is the result of what's called financial repression, by artificially keeping interest rates low, either through quantitative easing, Operation Twist, interest rate rigging, LIBOR rigging. It's all part of a systemic, industry-wide approach to assembly line fraud, to disenfranchise pensioners, and to consign them to death. Essentially what it is. It's a death machine.
Well, in fact, I'm going to show a little video clip that I found on YouTube, and this is a shark attack of a seal. As you see, this is what a feeding frenzy looks like. This is what a pension fund looks like. That little seal being eaten there, that is being eaten by Goldman Sachs. That's the high-frequency trading machine, the algorithm of Goldman Sachs, eating $100 million a day, every single day for the past 10, 20 years. It just eats little bits of chunks out of the pension funds across America, and now they look at each other and say, oh, it's the union members worker, it's the fireman, it's the policeman, it's the taxpayer, it's your fault, it's your fault. They don't look at the big giant shark that just ate half of their fund.
Yeah, no, they brag about the computer they put next to the New York Stock Exchange that steals $100 million a day through high-frequency wash trading, and that's then carried through with stealing in the pension account using financial oppression that they co-sponsor with the government. And Lloyd Blankfein, of course, is now rumored to make a transition from Wall Street to government, probably take over Tim Geithner's job. So his expertise in committing massive financial fraud will be useful over there at the Treasury.
Exactly. Now, here we saw the pension funds being eaten. Now, I want to say there's a shark-like guy in the news regarding this. Javier Bardem joins Spanish demonstrators. So he was out in the streets of Spain protesting against the austerity cuts. And he said, quote, "This is a very unjust situation because the government, rather than making the financial sector pay for the consequences of what they've done, they put all the weight on unemployed people, sick people, pensioners."
Oh yeah, I like that guy. Remember he was in No Country for Old Men?
Well, you know they say, bring forth the guillotine. Here, he's going to bring forth the air compressor tank. Let's bring this forth. He should be marching out there, march on Goldman Sachs, march on JP Morgan, march on HSBC, march on Barclays, march on Santander, march on Bankia, and go, you know, bring these guys over there.
Yeah, he had that cow killer air compressor machine. He just, through air compression, it, you know, puts a projectile through the head. You know, it'd be great. He'd just go up to Wall Street, go down, you know, into the JP Morgan's office and just, you know, quietly do the world a favor. Some deterrent. I mean, right now there is no deterrent. That's why the size of the crimes and the frequency of the crimes are increasing. That would be what we call in the business a price signal. Maybe it's time to step in there. No.
Well, you talk about the crimes getting bigger and bigger. That's in my next headline, Max. HSBC dragged closer to the heart of LIBOR investigation. The UK's largest bank, HSBC, could be formally dragged into the LIBOR investigation for the first time after it emerged. Links between one of its traders and peers at other banks were at the center of investigations by financial regulators. Questions about HSBC's involvement in LIBOR manipulation came as further pressure came to bear on the bank and its former chief executive, Lord Green, about its involvement in money laundering. So here's a bank, as we covered the last episode, HSBC was involved in drug money laundering, $7 billion in cash. Came from the Mexican drug cartels after they beheaded hundreds of people, took it to HSBC, they said no questions asked, took it, laundered the money. All of these guys are now in charge of cleaning up the financial system in Ireland. Here, Lord Green is David Cameron's trade minister. And he was the CEO of HSBC while they were involved in all this laundering. And now who's stepping down? Yeah, no, they're having trouble holding on to deposits. So they've got a new program now. If you open an account with HSBC, instead of a toaster, they give you a Mexican head. Well, you know, but this brings me back to this point that Javier Bardem had made, is like he was asking why the government is making the people pay rather than the financial sector. And we see that's because the government is the financial sector. There's a revolving door back and forth, back and forth. And I have further proof. Not only did we see Tony Blair go from 10 Downing Street to JP Morgan, and now he's talking about coming back. Check this out, Max. In Washington, Blankfein backs Dodd-Frank. You know, he's claiming he's backing Dodd-Frank. That's not the story here. The story is Mr. Blankfein did not rule out working in government after his tenure as the chief of Goldman is over. I have aspirations to be desired, he said, eliciting laughter from the several hundred attendees. By any president, I didn't mean to limit it to the United States. Yes, of course. He's well qualified to be part of the global banking disorder. You know, he's a guy who you'd want overseeing some new, let's say, special drawing right, credit bond facility Bank of Brussels as they roll up 500 trillion in bad euros debt into a new SDR collateralized pyramid scheme run by Lloyd Vampire Squid Blankfein. It's beautiful. He's the paragon of Ponzi. It's Lord Blankfein. But Max, bring this back to this issue at hand here, is we've seen, you know, nations across Europe have a Goldman Sachs guy parachuted in to basically manage their demise, manage their spin into nothingness, and all of their assets, income-producing assets, handed over to make good on the other frauds that the bank is committing. So here he's not even saying, I'm not limiting myself to the United States. I could go take over Spain. He could be parachuted into Syria. They're looking for a new leader. Oh, no, it's like the movie The Boys from Brazil, where they clone Hitler. Goldman Sachs clones financial Armageddon provokers, and they send them to countries all over the world. Lloyd Blankfein is just a clone of JP Morgan, going back 100 years. It's been one uninterrupted flow of cloned sadists on Wall Street and around the world. Congratulations, Lord Blankfein. Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report. Thank you, Max.
The 62-year-old Wall Street tycoon raked in nearly $500 million between 2000 and 2007, according to the Oversight Committee. 1 year alone, earning more than $106 million. Along with all that money came immense homes. This estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, complete with tennis courts and swimming pool, and a $21 million apartment on Park Avenue in New York City, and a vacation spread in Juniper Island, Florida, with a postcard-perfect view, not to mention a lavish art collection reportedly worth millions. Outside the hearing room, I tried to ask him about all of this.
Do you think it's fair that you made so much money when your company is actually in bankruptcy right now?
I'm sorry, I'm on my way to it.
But some of the critics have said that you've had a chance to save your company, and you haven't. Is it greed? I mean, do you have anything to say to the people that are watching this right now, that are wondering, you know, why this has happened? You have nothing to say.
Are you going to be in the testimony?
Absolutely.
Good.
I also asked him about all of his real estate holdings.
How do you rationalize that when the rest of the country is in turmoil?
At the hearing, Congressman Henry Waxman asked Fold if he deserved all the money he's made at Lehman.
Do you think it's fair, and do you have any recommendations on fundamental reforms that would bring a new approach to executive compensation?
Mr. Chairman, we had a compensation committee that spent a tremendous amount of time making sure that the interests of the executives and the employees were aligned with shareholders.
Now, he's chose not to answer that very direct question. Congressman Waxman twice asked him that again, but never got a clear answer. Wolf?
Abby, thanks.